So we're here today with Professor Thomas Berger, who's been visiting us from the University of Boston, where he's a professor in the Department of International Relations. He's here to talk about the impact of history in shaping current regional developments, particularly in terms of Japan's foreign policy. Tom, how important do you think the debate about history is at the moment?
I think one could sort of approach this both in terms of a domestic political level and at international political level. And I think what is very important to understand is that, first of all, Abe's approach to the history issue and his what are widely called as revisionist views about historical questions is motivated very strongly by the belief, and this is a belief which is widespread among Japanese conservatives, that Japan does not have too much nationalism, but too little. One of the sources of Japan's strength back from the Meiji period on was a sort of sense of national unity, the sense of common purpose which united the Japanese people and the Japanese state. And it was that sense of common purpose, of unity, that sense of nationalism, which helped fuel Japan's very rapid rise into the ranks of the global powers. And it was lost first and foremost because of the Allied policies, especially the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunals, which imposed a very negative view of modern Japanese history and of the Japanese Empire. And that was further reinforced by left-wing forces in Japanese politics, progressive forces, who, for their own set of reasons, were anti-nationalist, opposed to state power. Now, not everyone in Japan agrees with that point of view, but it is a point of view that is deeply embedded in the Liberal Democratic Party and in conservative circles in Japan more generally. And it has been the purpose and one of the chief aims of Japanese conservative leaders since the 1950s, at least, to restore that sense of purpose, to restore the Japanese nation.
Why is it happening now? Because...
Well, there are a couple of reasons. Japan feels that it is, and there's a general mood, you can see this reflected in many different levels of society, not only among conservatives, that Japan is in decline and that is in fact threatened by the outside world. Sources of this are demographic shifts, the very low birth rate, Japan's eroding competitive edge. There's a lot of attention paid to the enormous thrust and push that's coming from Korea.
If you could give us 3 headline initiatives you think that could be adopted by Japan to try and ameliorate some of these historical tensions, what would they be?
You're catching me a little bit flat-footed here.
Putting you on the spot, but
look, I think that in very broad terms, I think Japan and the Abe administration has to take the history issue seriously. And they have to understand that simply trying to convince the outside world by repeating over and over again that they're committed to a peaceful path of development and cooperation with the outside world is not going to solve this issue. Nor is it going to be enough to tell the Americans, ignore this history issue. It is an intra-Asian game. Just focus on how Japan and the Abe administration is trying to do lots of useful things in East Asia, like reinterpret the Constitution, come up with new guidelines for U.S.-Japanese defense cooperation, push the Trans-Pacific trade. This is what we're hearing right now from Tokyo a great deal. So just forget all of this symbolic stuff. Japan should give up this kind of denial that there is a problem on this area. It's not going to work with its relations with its Asian neighbors, and it's not going to work increasingly with Washington, D.C. And then the question is then the 2 key countries are, of course, South Korea and China. Those 2 countries, you need to have a differentiated approach. You can accomplish things with South Korea, which I think at this point in time you cannot accomplish with the People's Republic of China. I think that the possibility for a genuine reconciliation, it is a long-term project of changing societal level views of each other. If you really want to deal with this issue, you have to do more. With the Koreans, they need to do that, and they need to begin with the comfort women issue. They have to go back to this topic. They have to not only maintain the Kono statement, they have to create a system, revive a Asian Women's Fund type initiative that is a compensation fund, and they need to do it this time around with cooperation of the Koreans. With China, I think the project has to be to somehow find a way of taking the issue off the agenda. Can't really reconcile Korean and Japanese and Chinese societies at this point, but we have to get this issue off the political agenda. Again, that's going to require Chinese cooperation. Yeah, so we have to convince the Chinese that this is not useful way of doing things. But that's going to be much easier to do if Korea and Japan and the United States are all on the same page. In some ways, some of the Chinese attempt to use the history issue, there's a manipulative side to it, but there's also a genuine side to it in the Chinese case, but is encouraged by the fact that there's disunion.
Yeah. Tom, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.